Welcome to Not Starving Artist, the podcast. I'm your host, Brooke Benson, money coach and equity actor. I am your financial cheerleader, here to help you build your financial confidence and have power over your money. The best part, no budgeting or bi-weekly paychecks required. I went from being a broke BFA grad having weekly panic attacks about money to a financially confident, wealth-building actor and business owner. Money gets to feel fun, simple, and sexy, and I am going to show you how. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm so excited to bring you an incredible human and one of my current one-on-one clients. Her name is Morgan Goodman. We've got so much on the docket today. So before we start diving in, Morgan, I would love for you to introduce yourself.
My name is Morgan Goodman, and I'm a 26-year-old actor who lives in New York. I have a dog. She might make a guest appearance. She's laying next to me. I'm originally from North Carolina, which is where I met Brooke.
I hope your dog makes an appearance because she's quite cute for those people who are watching on YouTube. Okay, so let's start with, give us the rundown of where you were before you jumped into money coaching, before you started your financial wellness journey. Give us a rundown of what that looked like.
Yeah, I actually during the pandemic, post-graduation, really kind of took a nosedive into financial wellness and read 6 or 7 books and followed blogs and watched YouTube videos and was really getting into talking about money and being fiscally aware and money education specifically for women, but also for people who don't grow up and are gifted a savings account or things like that, as well as living in New York and being like, my rent is not going to be a quarter of my income. When people are like, I budget
the pie charts, they don't work. Right. Not for New York.
I budget $35 a week for groceries. And I'm like, amazing. My bodega charges $35 for a box of Cheerios. So I was really getting into that. And you and I actually had talked about it, and I had talked a lot on my Instagram about it, and people were like, oh, I love talking about this. And I felt like such a financial warrior. And I felt like I had set up a Roth for myself and a CMA savings investment account and was like, I am crushing it. And then I just went through a very big shift in my life where I suddenly took on a lot more financial strain. I moved, and moving is expensive anywhere. Moving is really expensive in New York. I moved. I had to refurnish an apartment. I had just changed jobs. I am financially independent, and I had a little help before then, and then I didn't. So I think I was then in a place where I was like, where did that person go who felt so confident, who felt so in control of her money, who felt so I've got this? Because I went into my savings during my move, which I've now learned is that's what it's for. But at the time I was like, well, what am I doing? I'm spending all this money. I've worked so hard to save. I feel stuck. I feel like I'm starting over. And I was definitely in paycheck to paycheck, down to the dollar, being I can't breathe. I have no airspace when it comes to money. So that's when I actually at the beginning of this year had made a goals list, because last year was kind of a hullabaloo for me. And so this year I was like, I'm really going to accomplish these things. And I had written in my financial goals, I was like, you should talk to Brooke about one-on-one. And I did that in January. And I think we started talking in April. But
oh, I love that. I didn't know that.
Yeah, I had been like, okay, so what are tactical things I can do, steps I can take? And one of them was to talk to you. And now here we are.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for sharing all of that, because I also know there are a lot of people who are going to be listening to this who are going through similar huge life transitions, or who also feel very squeezed paycheck to paycheck. And so having them hear your story, and that there are so many people who are going through that exact same thing. And it also doesn't mean that things are hopeless. So now talk about your expectations, or what you thought one-on-one coaching was going to look like what some of our focuses were during coaching and like where your headspace and your like logistics are at now. I'm going to leave that open for you.
Yeah. I didn't really know what I expected exactly, but I knew I had done your like OG crash course. We went to college together. I knew what kind of person you were. I knew the kind of energy you brought to a space, and I obviously like followed you in your journey of like building your business and what you would talk about, and all that resonated with me because I I don't think I wanted to admit it at the beginning, but the majority of the problem was like my thoughts and not actually the money coming in or out, or not having it or having it, or spending the savings, not spending the savings, having a credit card, not having a credit card. Those things didn't really matter. And those things couldn't be touched until I fixed my headspace and my thoughts around money. Um, so I knew I expected, like, I know you talk about how emotion is tied to money, but I just didn't know how deep it went. Um,
Mm.
which leads me to probably the first 3 months. It was like, work on your brain, work on your thought patterns. Like, what it was like, I don't care about a single number. Not really. Like, we made a money flow, but it was not like, all right, so this is how much you're spending, and this is how much you can't spend, and this is what you want to make. It was literally, you have to stop thinking, in a very, let me be very clear, in a very supportive, encouraging way. But it was like, this thinking, we're going to stay where we are unless something changes.
Yeah,
um,
so talk about some of those, like what were those pivotal thoughts or the biggest ones that stand out to you of having to adjust? Because yes, I also want to touch on this. We set up the money flow week 2, right? Like we got the numbers in order, and then in order to continue to grow the numbers and move forward with like making the numbers something that you really love, like the thoughts were the things that were needed to be the first dominoes to fall. So what are some of the biggest ones that stick out to you of like these were the thoughts that had to shift first?
Oh, I think the first big one was my savings, and that it's there to be spent. And thanking myself for preparing that, and thanking myself for being so diligent in my savings, so that when my life did take a 180, I had $15,000 to lean on. And
Mm.
instead of going, oh my God, I spent $15,000, being like, look what I was able to do for myself. Look what I was able to accomplish for myself, and be able to do something like move in New York on my own, and be able to design an apartment that really brought me a lot of joy that I really needed at the time. And um, that allowed me to do things like pick up and go to Paris for a month for my 25th birthday. Um, so thanking that money, instead of going, I can't believe I spent this money. Why did I spend my savings? Why am I touching that? So that was definitely my first big one, was like being like, that's what it's for. Money is to be spent. Money is also to be saved, but money is to be spent.
Yeah.
Um,
I also want to stay there for a second because I think it's so incredible, Morgan, that you, before even starting coaching, you allowed yourself to use those savings during a transitionary time, right? Like, even though we were working on the thoughts of like, it's, I don't have to feel guilty about this. The fact that you are able to let yourself spend it and let yourself go to Paris and let yourself live alone in an apartment that makes you happy, like that is so incredible. And such a self-care thing that you did for yourself in that time. And this is why when I talk about the whole point of saving and everything we do with money is to spend it, and why we have to focus on the skill of spending is for this exact thing right here. Because you giving yourself the gift of money and space during a transition, and then afterwards have feeling guilt and shame and kind of beating yourself up for it, then like it's about not having that, right? You gave yourself this gift, you cared for yourself in that way, and then being able to then move into the next season of money without having to feel guilt about it. Like this is why thinking about our savings differently is so important, because at the end of the day we just want to feel good about money, but
we can't just like spend the savings and be like, I feel good now, and then I'm just going to feel shit later. We want to feel good all the time. So thank you for sharing that. You can continue.
Of course. No, it's so true because I was like, I can do this. Look at me. I'm moving. And then I was like, oh my God, I spent all this money. So you are so right in that. My dog just yawned. Uh, what were we talking about? Oh, mindset shifts. And like, that was one of my first ones. That was like a really concrete, like this we are going to be, my voice teacher used to say, like waiting for the bus. Like we'll do the same exercise 100 times, and until the bus comes, like we're just going to sit here, we're going to wait for the bus. And that's how I feel like that specific thought school of thought was for me. Is it was like every week I'd come back and I'd be like, I made progress but this thought, I made progress but this thought, I made progress but this thought. So until I finally got there, which allowed a different thought process to start, and a different like honestly, like right now we're talking about, you said to me a couple weeks ago, you were like, your spending is not the problem. Because I was like, well, I went out for margs and I didn't need to. And you were like,
Mm-hmm.
your spending is not the problem. Your income that is lower than I had realized. That is what, like, let's focus on growing that and imagining more for yourself, instead of being like, these $10 frozen margaritas are what pushed you over the edge and what
I
makes
just
you
want,
financially unwell.
yes, I need everyone to hear that. I will never tell you not to get the $10 margarita, right?
Really?
And let's stay here because I want to talk about like the actual logistics of this. Because in the financial wellness Venn diagram of the things that we talk about, it's managing the money you do have, increasing your income, and money mindset. And you can't talk about one without talking about the other two. Like the three are totally intertwined. And we talk about managing the money you do have first because sometimes it's not an income problem. Sometimes it's a systems problem. Sometimes money is going places you don't want it to go. So that's why we focus on that first. But then once we systemize that, then it becomes very clear if there's an income problem or a desire to make more income, which is what became very apparent in our time together, where every time like you would go out for a nice drink like once a week, it made you feel squeezed. And it's like, okay, you're not balling out every single night of the week, just like throwing the card down. Who cares? You're so intentional about your spending, and you worked very like intentionally to become intentional about your spending. And so when you're that intentional about spending and you're still feeling squeezed, that's when we see the income path, right? Of like wanting to increase the income. So talk about that realization, that call that we had where it was like, spending is not the problem for you.
I think, well, I think that has to do with my money story. I think I just like grew up with like not the most frivolous, like I like nice things. I love that about myself, but I didn't for a long time. I'm like, I like nice things. And like, even in like high school, my friends would be like, why did you buy $129 Madewell jeans when these ones are less expensive? And I would like feel so bad about that. But you know what? Who's still wearing the same jeans? This girl. But I think I always felt like spending was the problem. I think when I would come home, and God love her, I love my mother more than anything in the world. But if I came home and was like, oh, I spent $70 on a Lululemon pair of shorts, it was like, well, that's ridiculous. That's a ridiculous thing to spend money on. Being in a BFA program, when I got my first pair of like LaDuca shoes, which is like a kind of
The
like
creme de la creme of character shoes.
right, the rite of passage. Like I did my first professional show, and my mom was like, okay, I'm gonna get you a pair of shoes, and I was like, okay, great. And we like went to the store, and it was like, and they're $350. My mom was like, that's ridiculous. And again, like she didn't mean poorly by any of that, but I think that's like where it started. And then like going into college and being like, oh, I'm going to do this, or I'm going to buy this, or I'm going to go out to eat, and it's not necessarily fast food, or I'm going to spend money on this, that, or the other. Like, it was just always this, I felt like my spending was the issue. And so I think when I look for something to, and low key, like, grew up in like a Dave Ramsey household,
Mhm.
of where there was a point in time that like friends of mine who were like from like a certain group, they really believed in this kind of I'm doing finger quotes, but financial literacy, which is really just stop spending money. And my father very much was like very Dave Ramsey. And so I think all these things I had been fed was always like, your spending's a problem, your spending's a problem. So when I reached the point that I was like, okay, this is my flex spending that I've set up in our money flow. This is my flex spending. When it would go like, and you told me, practice getting it to zero, practice spending to zero every week. And I think doing that in the first place was really terrifying to me. But then being like, well, like, it was almost like I couldn't get it to zero. Like, I didn't want to, because it felt like spending was a bad thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very roundabout way of getting there. But like,
Yeah.
I feel like spending always felt like the problem, because you have control over that. And I think until recently, in conversations we've had, I also didn't feel like I had control over my income.
Yeah.
Especially as an artist, being lucky again, finger quotes, lucky enough to have a steady job that gives me insurance, that I work 4 days a week, that they feed me the entire time I'm there, so my grocery bills cut in half. Like all those things, I always felt like, okay, I should be lucky to have this. So the problem is the spending. The problem is the
Yeah.
spending.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing all of that. I want to touch on two things here. One, I want to talk about your money flow, since you brought it up and bringing it to zero. And then I want to come back to the artist brain, right? Of settling for bare minimum and thinking that we're being given the world. Like, let's dive into the starving artist stuff. So I want to talk about money flow. When you said take it to zero, and that was the coaching I gave you, let's talk about taking the flex account to zero, because when we say that, that doesn't mean that you're spending every bit of money that you have and your entire bank account is going to zero. But when we're taking something to zero inside of the money flow is separated into different accounts, so that the account you're taking to zero is your fun spending. Like, that is your food, you're going out, your marge, your whatever. That's your fun spending. The bills, the card payments, all of that stuff is being taken care of by the rest of the money flow. So flexing the muscle of taking an account to zero, of allowing yourself to spend what you've allocated to spend without any extra. Tell me about how that felt the first couple of times you did it, or how it's feeling now doing that.
Stop it. Sorry, my dog is being disruptive. It still feels that way sometimes, if I'm being honest. But I just like would open, because we talked about like very, very, very early on, like when you open your bank account and you mentally subtract rent.
Mm-hmm.
And you go, okay, this minus $18.50, which is what I pay in rent. And that's what I have. And so when we set up a flow, like you said, there's written bills and all of that stuff's in one account, and then the other account is my spending account and for me, that includes groceries, but it includes fun money if I want to buy a shirt, if I want to go out to eat. And I literally would look at it and be like, because the number is fairly low in retrospect for what I have to spend weekly just for fun. I'm not working with a wild budget there. So I think seeing a smaller number and then being like, and now I have to make it even less, was like sitting in the car and having your foot on the gas, but like refusing to put it in drive. Like, I will not get out of park. It's not going to happen. And I think it just felt like seeing the number zero felt really terrifying, even though objectively, I understand that I have a whole other account dedicated to all the things I need to live. need, and that's down to my dog's insurance and my gym membership, and like, so not even things just that I need, but other things I want, other things I like, and other things I choose to spend my money on. So I think it just felt so terrifying to be like, I'm gonna spend all this money, because your brain is even like, okay, well, if you don't spend all that money, then next week you'll have all that money plus a little bit more money. And then next week, if you don't spend all that money, then you'll have a little bit of that money plus more money, even though you've allocated enough money for every week. So I I still now, like, I went out to dinner with a friend the other night, and she's going through a breakup, and she really loves tiramisu, and she was like, I'm not gonna get it. I can't afford it. And I was like, well, I'm gonna get it. Like, I'm gonna get you tiramisu. Like, that's the silliest thing I've ever heard. And I remember, like, the next day I was like looking, just like double checking the bill. And I was like, why did I spend that extra $8 on tiramisu? What do you mean? What do you mean? It's okay. Like, that's what the money is for, is to be spent on things like your sad friend or a pair of shoes. Like, I think it's just so hard to get out of this space that's like, don't spend the money on things that aren't necessary and things
For
that
sure.
are frivolous.
And and I want everyone to hear this. This is why we implement strategies to help with those thoughts, because we can sit in our journals all day long and be like, it's okay for me to spend $8 on tiramisu. It's okay for me to spend $8 on tiramisu, right? But if you don't have like a tactical system to back up it actually feeling and being okay, like the thought work isn't going to do shit, or it might do some, but then every time you look at the bank account, it's going to be like, oh, wait, this is why I shouldn't have spent the $8. So having an account that you are allowed to take to zero, and that's the goal, to take it to zero, it's helping you unlearn the fear of spending because you're supposed to take that number down. It also shows you that every single time, whether it's every month, every week, bi-weekly, that account gets filled back up. Money is always coming back into that account. So it helps reinforce the money's always coming in, money's always coming in. And then the third thing is that it's helping you to like unlearn the fear of money and numbers going down when you're spending it, when the money is meant to be spent. So it's taking the strategy, taking the tactical stuff to help back up the thoughts of, I want to feel totally fine buying a pair of shoes or buying an $8 tiramisu for my friend who's going through a hard time, right? So I love that you shared that example, because that is exactly why we do the money flow. It's not just so you know your numbers. That's inevitable. That's a byproduct, but it's to help you like emotionally feel good about how you're spending, because something that we've worked on is feeling really good about spending and enjoying your spending when you are spending. So now talk to me, before we dive into starving artist things, tell me about spending and enjoying spending and some of the things that come to your brain that you've allowed yourself to enjoy more over the past 3, 4, 5 months.
Going out to eat.
Mm.
I love, I love, I love going to dinner and being like, let's get an app. Let's get my entree. Oh, you want dessert? I want dessert. Let's have dessert. Oh, I want a cocktail. I want two. Great. Knowing that's what that little bit of money is for. Like, I don't have to be like, well, I'm not going to be able to pay my rent because I got this. Which is kind of what we were touching on. I was like, your spending is not the problem. The 2 margaritas are not what's sending you over the edge. If I've already, which I still struggle with, because I'll be like, okay, well, have I gotten groceries for the week? Because then I need to make sure that I have enough in my allocated weekly flex, but definitely going out to eat. And I'll be like, it's not a bad thing. And I think that also comes from like the Ramseyisms of being like, you can control that, so don't do it. You know, you can control how much money you spend on food, and it's so frivolous and it's so extra, so don't. So definitely going out to eat. What else? I think being able to like, I'm such an Amazon save for later cart person that I have like probably 300 things in my save for later, whether they are like skincare replacements or like little knickknacks for things in the house that I would really like, that would make my life a lot easier. Being able to like put one of those in the cart and then just buy them and be like, huh, is a really nice feeling, because I think I also was in this mindset of like, but you don't need it, so wait until you need it, wait until you have to have it. No, like it's okay to buy the refill of the skincare that you like now, and like just be on the backup and be ready for when you need it, like little things. And which is so funny, because you think it would be like, well, no, I let myself, like, I buy, I don't know, an $80 Russian manicure once a week, which is great if that's your prerogative, but it's very much like, oh, I bought this protein powder that has been in my cart for 6 months. And it's okay.
Yeah.
Um, little things for me, for sure.
Yeah. I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions about like financial freedom and what feeling financially well and like working on your relationship with money is going to get you. Like we tend to think it's the big things like the luxury vacations, the like luxury apartment, the really nice designer purses and all of that. And all of those things are fantastic. I'm not saying we can't want them and get them and desire them, but the stuff that actually is going to make you feel like a big exhale is those little things like you were saying of like I'm going to get this protein powder and I don't have to like you know put it on my credit card and hope that I can pay it off when the time comes, or I can go out to eat and get a margarita and know that this isn't going to put me in the red. Like it's those little day-to-day things that actually make us feel the most expansive. And for most people, you can start to feel that expansiveness without raising your income, right? It's like the money flow is going to help you feel those exhales and that expansiveness now. And then now let's talk about raising your income. Let's talk about the artist mentality, because you and I also both went to the same college. We both got BFAs at the same college, and we got the same kind of training, and financial education was 0% a part of it. Did you? I tell this story in my professional prep semester. It was like the business side of acting our senior year, and we were told we'd learn about money in that semester. And I remember we only had one class day that was dedicated to money. And our professor told us, move back to your hometown after college, work at restaurants and do some, community theater while you save up $1,000. Once you save up $1,000, you can move to New York, LA, or maybe Atlanta. And that was all we got. That was the financial education we got. That was it.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
I've never heard that story.
Yeah, and it's so wrong on so many levels. $1,000 will get you nowhere in any of those big cities. Also, why is it always maybe Atlanta, right? It's always New York, LA, maybe Atlanta. And then there's so many things that are wrong with that education, as well as there was nothing else to back it up. So I want to know for you, let's start with college. Did you get any like education? When did you start self-educating? Did you hear anything during your college experience? Talk about it.
No, I knew nothing during college. And honestly, my college application process was really interesting, because my parents, again, like it was a really fiscally tight time in the fam. And so when talking about college, my parents like worked with this advisor who worked on colleges, but like had no idea that the theater and the acting world. And so when I brought this list of 13 schools that I was going to apply and audition for, they were like bringing these schools out of nowhere that had not even a program, and being like, but they have a fine arts degree. And you're like, hello. So like, first of all, I remember going into it, I already felt like this. It already felt like this. In like the college world. And I remember I actually got into a school that I really wanted to go to. And I remember even with, I had gotten like $30,000 worth of scholarships. And even with that, it was still like $57,000 a year. And I remember my parents just being like, no, like we can't. So I think just talking about money in college, I remember going into college and being like, okay, well, I'm going here. And I ended up, of course, like I made my best friends there, but I was like, I'm going here because I can afford it. It's an hour and a half car ride from home, not a plane ride. It's in-state tuition, not out of state, stuff like that. So I definitely think I went in knowing nothing, and I went in feeling bad and knowing nothing. Um, and I started to self-educate. I think it was after college. Like, I don't think it was during college. And I always had a job of some sort. I worked as a hostess, or I worked at a car dealership at one point in college. Just like in the office, and that was like just enough, plus my $50 a week allowance that I got from my parents, to be like groceries. Groceries, and like your trip to Bojangles that you really needed when you were hungover. Like that was
Bojangles.
Literally.
Bojangles and Cookout. I miss them dearly.
I miss Bojangles every day of my life. But I also like lived in an apartment off campus starting my sophomore year, and my parents paid my rent, which was $425 a month for one bedroom.
It hurts to remember the college rent prices that we were paying.
Yes. So I was kind of head in the sand about it. I really was. And I received no education on money. And I actually left school to do a different program in New York my senior year through a different school. And that also had none. So it's not like, oh, my arts program is really, really shit in the bed, for lack of a better term, about not talking about money. It's like, no, nobody was. So I think that was like the start. And then I graduated. I came home for the summer, and then I moved back in August to New York, and I had like 6 jobs. I worked as an assistant for an executive producer. I worked at Madewell. I watched my neighbor's dogs 2 nights a week who worked at restaurants. So I watched them from like 7 p.m. to like 1 a.m. There are 3 dogs a couple nights a week. I worked as an assistant for another woman. I babysat and nannied. And I was just like off my rocker because I was paying at the time, I think I was paying like $800 a month in rent. I lived with a couple friends who I had met on a contract, and I lived in this bedroom that was like, it was like the small bedroom of the apartment, and it was like long and narrow, and it could only fit a twin bed. So I had a twin bed and a dresser, and that's all I had in there. And then I had a closet, but it was outside of the room. So like that's where I lived, and that's what I paid, and that's what I was doing to pay that. And at the time I was auditioning, I was psycho because I was like 21, and I was like, I'm gonna get up at 6 a.m. and I'm gonna go do this, and I'm gonna go to my 3 jobs, and I'm gonna pick up the kids. And I was like, what am I doing? And looking back, I don't know how I did it. I really don't know how I survived. But even then, I was like, I know what I'm doing isn't working, but like I'm able to pay my rent and put my like $25 a week towards my retirement fund. Oh, hi. Towards my retirement fund, and do those things. So it's fine. And then honestly, it was when the pandemic hit, and I was in an apartment with my boyfriend at the time for 4 months, just stuck. And I was like, I'm losing my marbles. And I started to read. Oh, my mom, this is part of it. My mom gifted me when I graduated from college. This is where it comes full circle. She gifted me 3 books. She gave me The Financial Diet.
I just want to say though, those first 2 books that you were gifted right out of college, those are great financial books. I was gifted The Total Money Makeover by Dave Ramsey when I graduated college. So I'm really glad that you got started with Financial Diet and Brooke Millennial.
The other one was The Defining Decade. That was the other one. And so I had these books like sitting on my shelf. And so when I was stuck at home, I started to read them. And Financial Diet was fine. Defining Decade was good and like gave me a lot of anxiety about like my career path. But Broke Millennial, I think, started it for me because it's written by a young woman who lives in New York, who has a BFA. She didn't come from money. So like she was paying all her own bills, and she would be talking to these people who'd be like, well, your rent is supposed to be this and this and this and this. And she was she really broke down. Like she was the starter for me. And I think her, is it Erin Lowry? Is that who
Erin
wrote?
Lowry.
Yeah. Um, so that's when my financial education really started. It was that book. That's when I was like, okay, so the world is not against me. Just nobody has told me what to do with it. Uh,
Right.
and
And
even
even, yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, and even then, my grandmother did, when I turned 18, she was like, I've set up a like investment account for you. And she was like, and I put $1,000 in it. And I was like, thanks, Grandma. And then she was like, and so you just have to put money in it every month and never stop, which we can unpack later. But that's kind of where I was like, so I had an inkling that I was like, somebody has to save money for me because it's not just going to come out of the sky one day. And then following people like women specifically who were like, here's all the things that you need to know that aren't saying, well, just marry a rich man. It was also something I was fed as an artist, was like, yeah, but as long as you have like a wealthy spouse, then you can do what you want, right?
Yeah. So with that, right, the artistic brain, like if you are a creative and you know that you want to be in an artistic career path, this is the narrative we're fed from birth, right? Is like marry rich or get
Or
ready to be
before.
poor, sucker. Yeah. And
Get ready to eat ramen noodles, and what they would always
literally,
be like, you'll just have like a lot of ramen and your bed will fold out from the wall, and you're like, okay.
yep, your stomach will be empty, but your heart will be full. That's one I heard a lot.
Yeah.
Um, right. And like backup jobs and survival jobs and all of this stuff of like, you must struggle for your art. And so having those like literal biologically worn neural pathways in our brains from day one, being like, you're gonna starve, or marry rich, or you'll starve, right? Like those are the things that are in there. So it's no wonder that all of us have such fucked relationships with money when we become adults and are actually doing this career in adulthood in real time. And like reality sets in. We're not in our cute little BFA programs, bopping around just doing our art. Exactly. And we're doing this in real time. And we're like, oh, wait, not only do I not know about the things, but then once I know about the things, I've got a lot of thoughts about the things, right? So let's talk about that because you did a lot of self-education. And then now it's like a lot of our work together is unpacking the emotions and the thoughts and the things that are keeping you small, right? Like you've got big visions, you've got places we're going. And so we're like cracking through those walls right now. And one of them is income. So talk to me about the income conversations that we've been having and your current thoughts about raising your income, what's available to you. Talk me through some of that.
So I got my first restaurant job in New York, and like was serving and ended up managing for the company, and they were kind of doing like a turnover at their other restaurant, and they were like, do you want to come manage here? And I was like, okay, my dog is being such a pain right now. um I was like, yeah. And I felt like really incredible because I had asked for more money than they had offered me, and they said yes. And I had asked for insurance, and I had asked for a 4-day-a-week schedule, and they said yes to all these things. And I was like, great, like I sucked it. I am on top of the world. I crushed it. I got everything I wanted. And now I'm going to be so financially like, woohoo, which first of all, credit to myself. I did suck it and I did crush it because I asked for things that weren't offered to me and that I was told that wouldn't be given to me.
Yeah. And I remember that was our first call together inside of coaching was we were talking about negotiating that package to something that was livable, exciting, right? And you did absolutely crush it. And they were like, yep, no problem.
Right. So like got that. Just felt like I have like reached the peak as an artist in the way, which is so silly. That's such a silly.
Yeah, but talk about that. Like, what did the peak mean to you? Like, what is the peak?
It meant to me, you have a paycheck that's going to be the same every single week. And it can be more if you want. If you want to pick up a day and work 5 days, fine. You are making enough money to comfortably pay your rent. And not comfortably like I can go buy a new pair of shoes comfortable, but comfortably like I'm not gonna eat oatmeal for a week comfortable. It was a job that I said I'll commit to you all, but if an acting opportunity comes that I want to take, I'm gonna go. I'm not
That
gonna,
they'd let you come back.
yeah. And that felt really big to me. I was like, I want to know, I have a place here. If I ever want to leave and come back, I have a place. And they're like, absolutely. So I'm also very, very grateful for all of that. They really set me up in a way that I didn't think I was going to be able to be set up. Like I have insurance that I don't pay into, and I have PTO, and I have sick days, and like these things that for most jobs are givens. Mm-hmm. And so for me, they felt like gold. I was like, I've got all these things that I needed.
Because for artists, we're told like healthcare is going to be really hard for you to get. Good luck, right? You're told like what are sick days? What is PTO? Like we don't have that as artists. You need a survival job. I mean, we're told this in college. Get a survival job that's going to let you leave and come back whenever you get contracts. Some comfortable minimum wage job that doesn't mean anything to you. So you're not like emotionally invested in it, which like we know a minimum wage job, it's impossible for you to feel that way because it's not paying you enough to not feel stressed, right? So we're like told to find that, whether it's catering or retail or a restaurant job or something like that. So just like, it is not, for all of you who are listening who are artists, it's not your fault for feeling like, oh my God, this is so incredible. But like we were conditioned to feel like that was the peak. And then you hit it, right? And you got it and you were in it. And it was like, okay, so now what?
And honestly, for a while, I was like, yeah, this is it. And my friends would be like, I'd be like, well, should I do this? And they're like, well, you can afford to, like, you've got the money now. And also adding to the pot of gold, I felt like I finally had one job. I had one.
Yeah.
And then I did like watch my neighbor's daughter in the morning for a couple months before summer. But for the most part, I had one job that I had to show up to and not free, and not opening the Pilates studio at 5 a.m., then running home in the middle of the day to take the dog out and go to the gym, and then going to the restaurant and closing it until 2 a.m. and waking up and doing it all over again. I was like, I have 3 days off in a row, all these things. And so I was feeling like really good about it. And I was going through a lot of like weddings, bachelorette parties, like things that they were allowing me to leave for. And I was like, this is amazing. And one day I was sitting there and my friend was like, she's like, well, yeah, like you've got the money now, like you've got the money to do that. And I was like, yeah. And then I was like, how much do I make a year?
And we did the math.
Did the math. Oh, I did the math and I was so disappointed. I was like, I thought I was making like at least this amount. But then my immediate thought was, well, yeah, but you eat for free the entire time you're there, and then you do have health insurance, and you do, and that's what I had to challenge, is be like, and that's where this first conversation of like also you being like, your spending isn't the problem, came into play when I went, oh my God, for financial transparency, I make $54,000 a year after tax.
In New York City.
And I thought I was winning. Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh. Which is just, it's so hard to, because it makes you feel bad to be like, am I ungrateful? Like, am I ungrateful that I'm not making more than that? And they already gave me more than what I asked for. And they've been so good to me. And the people themselves are wonderful. I have such a love for the people in the company, and I always will. But this specific realization of, oh my God, I'm literally only making this amount of money. Mm-hmm. And I have goals to buy an apartment one day, and I have goals to be able to travel, and I have what? So that's when the income conversation, and you had always hinted at it, You and your omnipotent glory would always be like, so why are we tied to this? Why are we tied to this job? And I'd be like, well, and then I'd say all the reasons I've said. And you would just kind of like let me exist and be like, okay, this is another waiting for the bus moment. Like she'll get there, she'll realize. And it was that day that I went, this is how much money I make. And you were like, yeah, yeah, it is.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we meant when we said your spending's not the problem.
Yeah.
And I think in addition, but it was the first time I was like, how am I supposed to dream of a life for myself that is so much bigger than this when I feel like this is the peak? That's a big one for me because I was like, great, I'm making this money. I can go, I can come back. Like I have it made. And then you were like, you said to me, you said, yeah, but what if you don't need a survival job when you come back? You said, what if you get another contract? What if you made enough money to take a month off? What if those things? And my brain was just like firing synapses that were going nowhere. It was like, no, 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 no.
Mm-hmm.
And so then how do you sit here and go, I want an apartment. I want to buy an apartment. I want to be able to vacation when you won't even let your brain want more for yourself because this feeling, and this is starving artist narrative, this is also feeling like I should be grateful for what I have been given and the opportunity I've been given. How am I supposed to dream for more for myself when I can't even go, maybe I should be making more than $54,000 a year?
Yeah. And it is not any creative's fault that you can't dream bigger than the peak that we've been fed. Because if that's the only thing that we've ever seen, once you get it, you're like, oh my God, oh my God, thank you, sir. You've given me healthcare and a living wage.
Right.
I can pay my rent. Thank you, thank you. Like that's what we're taught. That's how we have to exist, right? And we're taught that the ultimate dream is being able to work every few months, get on contracts, do jobs, whatever, and that you always have this stable job to come back to. And you bop out, you do your thing, and then at some point, magically, a switch flips and you book the big job, and all of a sudden now you can be a full-time actor and never have to do any other work, right? And like we're not taught what that in-between time is going to look like between survival job, going to auditions, getting some contracts, and then being able to be a full-time actor who's well known and making bank and buying your own apartment. There's an in-between time there. And I have this phrase that I always have in my head, which is rich first, actor second. Like the money nowadays is always going to have to come first before you make it big because it costs money to go to class. It costs money to survive. It costs money to manage your mental health so that you can be a fine artist, right? And so being able to like support yourself financially is going to come before you make it big. So we were talking a lot about what that in between time is going to look like for you. Like the jump between, the $50,000, $54,000 a year to full-time artistic creator, making a full-time living on that. There's something in between here where you can feel more expansive financially. Can you talk to me a little bit about some of the, like, as you've been going through this process of visioning bigger for yourself and dreaming bigger? I know this is one of the hardest things for a lot of artists to do. What has that process been like for you? What are some of the things you've been doing, or what are the thoughts that you've been thinking?
I think you're right, and that's one of the hardest things to allow yourself that sense of imagination beyond just I'm a successful actor, but what does being a successful actor look like for me? And one of the you gave me a prompt one time and you're like, dream day. Dream day. What does your morning look like? And it wasn't necessarily like what the entire day is, but like I immediately was like picturing my West Village apartment that I woke up in and made a coffee with my dog and was like studying my lines. And then I was like picked up for set and I was like in my trailer getting ready and my dog was like asleep on my feet and like those things that feel silly to say
Mm.
and they feel, dare I say, a little delusional.
Little
That
Delulu.
a little delulu, but you were also like, you have to learn to live in that place sometimes, because
Delusion
otherwise,
is welcome here. I remember saying that to you.
because I think there's, and I think this is something I'm struggling with as an artist right now. I think if you let yourself believe everything you might be capable of, that's scary. That's scary. Saying, well, this is it. I've gotten as good as it's going to get. And you know what? I'm so grateful for everything I've done. And, if I do this, it'll be great. And if I don't, it'll also be great. And I know I've tried, which, like, I can't even say that I've tried at this point. I'm submitting something tomorrow and I feel like it's the first thing I've tried on in 12 years.
Mm.
So I think that's the scary part, is to go, I do believe in more than this for myself. I think as an artist, that's a hard thing to say, because people are like, well, only this percentage of people make it, or only, like, I don't know, or like, well, it's a hard time to be an actor right now, like the strike, and trying not to, like, lose this sense of time. And I think also, as a generation greatly affected, not that everybody wasn't, but like by the pandemic, of like walking into my career and then the world shutting down and having to feel like I haven't lost time.
Mm-hmm.
And so all of that combined with and it's literally hard for me to say, to go, I am capable of so much more than this, and I believe in so much more than what I have right now for myself, is the hardest part. I have it in a sticky note on my mirror, and I begrudgingly some days say things like, I'm not afraid of my own power, and I trust myself with credit cards, and things like that. But I think that's the hardest part, is going, honestly, especially as a young woman, being like, I believe that there is like such a space where I'm so wildly successful. And then how do I get to believing that? Which is that in between we were talking about. It's like, how do I get from sitting here in my apartment being like, I know this isn't what I want for myself, for my life, and the dreams that feel too big but shouldn't, because you're allowed to dream as big as you want, and you're allowed to delusion is welcome here. You're allowed to go, in 10 years I am going to have a West Village apartment, and I am going to get picked up to go to set to film that day. And then going, what is the in between? Because you're right, there is this gap of, well, I can't stay where I am. But for most people, I'm also not going to wake up tomorrow having booked the Barbie sequel and be like, great, thank God. Whew, that's taking care. So how do you dream a little bit bigger every day, and how do you move towards that little bit more of what you want for yourself every day, and realizing so much of that, drawing a circle if you're not watching on YouTube, comes back to things like, I need more income, because I need more capacity in my brain to not be anxious about money, to not be thinking about money, to not be thinking about this minimum wage job that I do have that causes me stress. So I can do things like sit and ruminate with my thoughts, which is such an artist thing, but it's so necessary. And
It's so necessary.
annoying how necessary it is. It's annoying to go, okay, I just have to play. I have to play. I have to make 12 different choices, and I'm going to make a new one every time, and I'm going to see which one feels right. And that's the play comes after the, like, am I off book? Have I read the play? Do I know everything that's going on objectively? And so much of that comes, I used to say this to my dad, and he really didn't get it, though he meant so well. I was like, you can't pretend, even though my job is to act and play pretend, you can't pretend to have done the work, which takes up so much brain space that I'm
Mhm.
You told me 2 weeks ago, you're like, I don't want to hear you talk about work again. And I was like, yes, ma'am. My friend asked me, she was like, how's your day? And I wanted to be like, well, work. And I went, I'm not allowed to talk about work. But all this to say, like, this brain space that is so taken up by things like these jobs that aren't giving us what we need, and things like stressing about money and going, well, you know what I would love? I would love to just like go sit at a coffee shop by the water and like rot in my head about this scene that I'm working on, and then be like, but is it wasteful to go do that when I can do that in my apartment? Because I don't really, well, the one I want to go to, it's in the financial district, and so the coffee, if I get a coffee, it's probably gonna be like an $8 coffee, and then I know I'm gonna want a snack because I'm trying not to drink coffee on my stomach, so then like a $15 sandwich. Like that's the way it happens, which is why things like income are so important, even though up until now I personally have kind of refused to acknowledge that.
I love everything you just said. That was so beautiful because that is where like the up levels are going to be cracked into, right? Is letting yourself feel delusional, saying that shit out loud. One of the things I'm most excited about for you, Morgan, is a few years from now getting to listen back to this in your West Village apartment, waiting for your car to pull up, be like, I made that shit happen, right? So being able to like feel silly being delusional and like allowing yourself to want what you want and say, yes, this is going to happen. It feels crazy, but it's going to happen. When you claim those things and say them out loud, your brain literally starts offering you new paths, new options, new solutions. And you've experienced this week, right? Like I said, keep a list of everything your brain starts to offer you now that you've said, I want more income and less stress in a job, right? And like your brain will try and solve that for you. But right now, if your brain is saying this is our peak, your brain isn't going to offer you any solutions because there's nothing to solve for, because your brain is like, this is it. This is as high as we're going. So thank you so much for sharing that. As we wrap up the episode today, I would love to know if there are any like final aha moments or wins or things that we haven't touched on today that you think are important for people to hear.
I think an aha, and it's a big aha and it's a drawn out aha, but money is so emotional.
Put it on a t-shirt.
Money is emotional, but just acknowledging that money is like deep in your core, in your belly, and talking about things like money stories and talking about why you think about money a certain way, or why when I spent money moving, it felt so heavy versus spending money going to Paris. Objectively, I didn't spend the same amount of money, but if I would have, I can tell you that the money I spent moving was going to sit with me differently than the money I spent going to Paris. And I have to remind myself that every single day when I think about a frustration, or I think about like we went to the vet yesterday and it was $405, and I'm very glad I have vet insurance or pet insurance, but even that being like, that felt like nothing to me because I was like, it's the dog, I don't care. But then the Jonas Brothers were in town last week and I saw a ticket for like $120, and I was like, oh, should I go to the Jonas Brothers? Oh no, I shouldn't spend that money. So it's tied to like such a deep sense of self, which I think is why it's so scary to do things like be delusional and dream bigger and have that be so tightly knit with your finances, is because it will affect you in ways you don't think. I think that's my aha that I struggle with every day, is that it's such an emotionally driven, like visceral reaction to everything around you, and it's all connected. And money a lot of times is at the helm.
And one of the reasons that I love being a money coach is that money, it touches everything, and it also is usually not about money. whenever you're feeling a certain feeling, right? Like money is math and we can solve for math, right? Money is the easy part. The numbers is the easy part, but money touches everything. And it's a really easy place for our anxiety to settle, our self-worth to settle. Like everything touches money. And so what happens when you work on your relationship with money, you're actually working on your relationship with yourself, your relationship with your emotions, your relationship with your thoughts, your relationship with your work, your relationship with your dreams. Like that's what money is doing. And so money is the lowest common denominator to change your life. That's what I firmly believe, because it's so entrenched with emotions. And like, as you're doing this work, it can feel like you're shifting a lot, and it's because you are. Like, you're not just changing your money life, you're changing the entire trajectory of your life. The most important thing everyone can do this week is like start getting a little delulu, because your brain's going to start offering you new things. My last question for you is, if there was anyone who was listening to this today who was on the fence about joining one-on-one coaching, what things would you have to say?
You can't do it until you can't not do it.